Minecraft. Echoes of the end. The sky pulsed with a warm golden hue as square clouds drifted lazily overhead. Birds chirped in the distance, strange creatures made of pixels and light. A gentle breeze swept across the grassy hills, rustling through the tall grass like a whisper from the world itself. Steve blinked into consciousness beneath the shade of a lone oak tree. His body ached, not with pain but with unfamiliarity. He lifted his blocky arms, staring at them as if seeing them for the first time. His hand opened and closed slowly, wooden fingers clunking together with an odd stiffness. "What is this place?" he murmured. There was no memory, no past, just now. He pushed himself up, brushing the dust from his blue shirt and jeans, and took in the rolling green plains stretching endlessly in all directions. Mountains loomed on the horizon, capped with snow. To the west, a dense forest whispered secrets in the wind. Steve's hand brushed against something in his pocket. A book. Leather-bound, blank inside, save for the first page. Welcome to the Overworld. Survive the night. His eyes scanned the open fields once more. There were no signs of life besides the chirping birds and distant sheep dotting the hillsides. But the words haunted him. Survive the night. Night implied danger. He noticed a nearby tree and moved toward it, instinct guiding him. His hands reached out, punching the trunk with rhythmic strikes. Thud, thud, thud. Splinters flew. The trunk fractured, then popped cleanly into his inventory with a soft clicking sound that echoed inside his mind. Steve stumbled back. "What in the world?" he muttered, watching as the logs floated in front of him before vanishing into a strange invisible space he somehow understood was his inventory. Without knowing why, he began crafting. Wood became planks. Planks became a crafting table. His fingers worked fast, driven by the instinct that time was running short. He built a crude wooden pickaxe and scanned the land for stone. He descended into a shallow ravine nearby, stone walls beckoning him with mystery. The sound of trickling water echoed through the cave, and the cool darkness pressed in around him. He didn't know how he knew the crafting recipes. He just did. The shadows stretched long as the sun dipped behind the mountains, bleeding gold and crimson across the blocky sky. A chill settled in the air. Steve's heart beat faster. He gathered more cobblestone, fashioning stone tools and a furnace. When he returned to the surface, twilight had already taken hold. Crickets chirped, and the once inviting world now carried an eerie silence. The first growl came from behind him. Spinning around, he caught a glimpse of green, something small, hunched and snarling. A zombie. It shuffled forward, arms outstretched, its skin a sickly hue. Steve backed away, gripping his stone sword tightly. With a cry, he lunged. The zombie hissed and swung, but Steve ducked and slashed. It took 3 strikes before it crumbled into dust and vanished, leaving behind a piece of rotten flesh. Steve stood, panting. More growls echoed in the distance. Then came the hiss. He turned just in time to see it, green vertical body for stubby legs. A creeper. Not good, he breathed. The creeper sparked. He dove. Boom. The explosion rocked the earth, sending a shower of dirt and stone into the air. Steve groaned, ears ringing. His health had dropped dangerously low, a sensation he could feel as a dull, flickering energy inside his chest. He stumbled to his feet and sprinted toward a hill, digging frantically into its side with his pickaxe. Dirt flew. He didn't stop until he had carved a small cave into the hill. He sealed the entrance with stone and placed down his crafting table and furnace. The darkness inside was stifling. But then, salvation. He placed a torch made from a stick and coal, and soft orange light filled the shelter. Safe, for now. He sat down against the cold wall, breathing hard. Outside, the groans and hisses of the night creatures filled the air. In the silence of his makeshift cave, he opened the mysterious book again. A new line had appeared beneath the first. You survived your first night. The world watches. The end remembers. The end? Steve whispered. Something stirred deep within him. A memory? A warning? He wasn't sure. Morning came with the faint chirping of birds and warm golden rays piercing through the cracks in Steve's shelter. He stepped outside, cautious, sword at the ready. The monsters were gone, vanished with the night, but small scorch marks and scattered craters reminded him of how real the danger had been. I need food, he muttered, stomach growling. Nearby, pigs wandered lazily through the grass. Sheep grazed on the hillsides, and a chicken clucked as it hopped into a bush. Apologizing under his breath, Steve hunted his first meal. Raw pork in hand, he returned to the furnace and cooked it using leftover coal. The aroma lifted his spirits slightly. After eating, he packed his tools and gazed at the forest to the west. The trees there were older, thicker. The canopy cast strange shadows, and the air held a chill even in daylight. But something called him there. He approached slowly, stepping over twisted roots and fallen logs. As he passed under the forest's edge, the world grew quieter. The birdsong faded. The wind stopped. Even his footsteps seemed muffled. Then he saw it, a stone structure half buried in moss and vines. It was ancient, crumbling, unlike anything he'd seen in the world so far. Square bricks made from stone bricks and cracked variants hinted at a forgotten civilization. He stepped inside. The air was thick with dust. Spiderwebs clung to the corners. A single, unlit redstone torch flickered dimly on the far wall. He touched it. Click. A wall shifted. Behind it, stairs descended into darkness. Steve hesitated. But that strange voice in his mind whispered again. The end remembers. He took a torch from his bag, lit it, and began the descent. The stairs spiraled deep underground. The air grew colder with every step. Steve gripped his sword in one hand and his torch in the other, heart pounding with each creak and groan of the ancient stone beneath his feet. At last he stepped into a vast chamber. Rows upon rows of bookshelves towered above him, reaching into the darkness. Cobwebs hung like curtains. A minecart track ran through the center, broken in places, its rusted rails leading to a closed iron door on the far side. Steve ran his fingers along one of the books. Dust flew into the air, tickling his nose. Most of the titles were worn away, but one stood out, Echoes of the End. He pulled it from the shelf. The cover flaked in his hands. Inside, scrawled in an ancient script, were drawings of an obsidian portal, a dragon with glowing purple eyes, and a strange city floating in darkness. Steve's breath caught. He flipped through more pages, finding coordinates, cryptic poems, and a single phrase repeated again and again in increasingly frantic handwriting, "It's waking up." Suddenly, the torchlight flickered. A sound echoed through the chamber, stone sliding against stone. Steve froze. From the shadows, something moved. A silverfish, no, dozens of them, crawled out from the cracks in the walls. Their chittering grew louder, more frantic. He backed away, drawing his sword. "Oh, come on." The first silverfish lunged. He swung, killing it, but two more emerged in its place. He turned and ran, slashing at the swarm as he went. The iron door at the end of the tracks loomed ahead. He grabbed the lever beside it and pulled. Clang. The door groaned open just wide enough. He threw himself through and slammed it shut behind him. Silence. He collapsed against the door, breathing hard. This world, it wasn't just about survival. Something ancient was waking. The room he'd entered was small and circular, lit by a single unlit portal frame at its center. It resembled an end portal, but something was off. 3 of the 12 frames were missing. The rest were cracked or chipped, as if something had clawed at them from the inside. Steve stepped closer. A strange purple light shimmered faintly at the edges of his vision. The very air vibrated. He tossed the torch into a nearby holder and watched as it cast long shadows across the room. On the wall opposite the door, more writing. The end watches all. Eyes must open. Echoes must fade. Suddenly his book, the one from his pocket, glowed faintly. He opened it. New text had appeared. You've seen the library. The fragments remain. Seek the eyes. Open the gate. Steve whispered, "Eyes?" He knew now what they meant, eyes of Ender. But he had none. And to find them, he'd need to travel far. He pocketed the book, took one last look at the cracked portal, and turned back. His journey was only just beginning. Steve emerged from the forest and returned to the open plains beneath the afternoon sun. The peaceful chirping of animals was a jarring contrast to the danger he had just escaped. He needed gear, armor, weapons, supplies. If he was going to search for Eyes of Ender, he'd need to prepare for the Nether. He spent the next few days mining deep beneath the hills. He dug past granite and diorite, chiseled through layers of stone, and built tunnels reinforced with torches. It wasn't long before he struck iron. Then, deeper still, redstone, lapis, and finally glittering diamonds. He held one up to the torchlight, eyes wide. With excitement, he crafted a diamond pickaxe. Then, with buckets of water and lava gathered from below, he constructed his first nether portal. The obsidian was cold and smooth to the touch. The portal crackled to life with a low, eerie hum as purple swirls filled the arch. He stepped through. The world twisted. A moment of silence. Then heat. The air stung his skin as the nether revealed itself. Lava cascaded down crimson cliffs. The ground pulsed red and black. Ghasts cried in the distance, their moans echoing through vast caverns. Steve looked around cautiously. His portal sat precariously on a netherrack platform high above a lava lake. He built a bridge, block by block, sweat dripping from his brow as the burning void loomed beneath him. Halfway across, a ghast shrieked. Whoosh! A fireball arced toward him. Steve dove to the side just in time. The blast blew part of the bridge apart. He scrambled, placing blocks beneath him to stay above the lava, heart hammering. He reached the far side and found refuge in a small cave. He wandered the wasteland for what felt like days, fighting magma cubes, dodging fireballs, and collecting blaze rods from the fortress he finally discovered. The blazes hissed and burned with fury, and it took every arrow in his quiver and every potion of fire resistance he'd brewed to make it out alive. But he did. With a full stack of rods and a single thought in his mind: find the end. Back in the overworld, Steve used the blaze rods and ender pearls he'd gathered from slaying endermen in the desert to craft Eyes of Ender. He held the first one up to the sky. It floated upward, shimmered, then darted to the northeast. Steve chased it across rivers, forests, and plains. Days passed. Nights came and went. He built temporary shelters, avoided ambushes from pillagers, and even saved a wandering trader from a spider attack. Eventually, after days of tracking, the eye stopped above a patch of ground in a quiet meadow. Steve dug. Deeper. Deeper still. He hit stone bricks. A stronghold. His heart pounded as he broke through the final layer and dropped into the long-forgotten halls. Torches flickered as he moved silently through the corridors. Silverfish stirred in the cracks. He found loot, enchanted books, iron gear, golden apples. Then, finally, the end portal room. This one was intact. All 12 frames waited. Steve pulled out the eyes. One by one he placed them. The moment the final eye clicked into place, the room erupted in wind and light. Foam. The portal shimmered, dark and deep. A void calling his name. Steve stared at it, his breath catching. He stepped forward and leapt in. Darkness surrounded him. Then he was there. The end. A barren island floating in a void of purple stars. Obsidian towers rose high into the sky, crowned with flaming end crystals. The air buzzed with energy. And then a roar. The ender dragon soared overhead, its eyes glowing violet. Its wings sent gales of wind across the obsidian plain. Endermen roamed below, watching Steve with emotionless faces. He drew his bow and began shooting the crystals. Explosions erupted one after another. The dragon shrieked in fury. When the last crystal fell, the dragon turned on him. The battle was brutal. Steve dodged fire breath, leapt between pillars, struck with his sword when the beast descended. He used every golden apple, every potion, every trick he'd learned. And finally, with a final strike to the head, boom, the dragon screamed. Purple light exploded from its chest. It crumbled into energy, showering the island with experience. The portal home appeared. Steve stepped toward it, but something else caught his eye. A small portal in the distance, ringed in bedrock. The gateway to the end city. Steve approached the shimmering gateway cautiously. The void portal shimmered, suspended atop a bedrock pedestal. He crafted an ender pearl, took a breath, and threw it into the portal. The world twisted again. Suddenly, he was standing on a floating island made of end stone. Chorus plants towered above him like twisted alien trees. The sky was an eternal swirl of black and purple, and the land was fragmented into massive islands, separated by the void. In the distance, through the mist, he saw it, the end city. Towering spires of purple blocks and obsidian jutted upward like broken teeth. The city looked abandoned, yet preserved, as if someone or something had only just left. He drew his sword and approached. Inside the halls, shulkers lay in wait. One hissed and opened, launching a projectile that struck him in the chest. Wah! Steve cried as he began to float upward, the levitation spell lifting him toward the ceiling. He drank a slow-falling potion just in time and drifted down gently, dodging another shot. He dispatched the shulker and continued his ascent up the narrow stairwells and vertical jumps between towers. At the top, inside an item frame, was his reward, an elytra. Steve took the wings, gently touching the shimmering membrane. Then he noticed something else, hidden behind a wall of end rods, a chest. Inside, enchanted diamond gear, a dragon head, and a strange book bound in black. He opened it. Its title, Echoes of the End. He flipped through the pages. They weren't like any other book. They whispered. Moving symbols formed sentences before fading away. One phrase remained steady. The end was never empty. You were never alone. Back through the end portal, Steve landed once again in the overworld. Older, wiser, changed. The sky was brighter, but the world felt different. The grass still rustled, the sheep still grazed, but something in the air had shifted. He returned to his shelter near the forest. It was smaller than he remembered, just a box of stone and wood. But it was home. He placed the dragon egg on a pedestal of obsidian beneath glass. His trophies lined the walls. Elytra, the dragon head, the shulker boxes, armor shimmering with enchantments, and the book, that strange whispering book. At night, he sat near the fire and read from it, tracing the cryptic lines. He started to understand them, not with his mind but with something deeper. It spoke of other worlds, of realms beyond the end and nether, of echoes in the void, and of a name, Herobrine. It started with the fog. Steve woke one morning to find the world shrouded in mist. The sun barely pierced it. Trees were faded silhouettes. The air was heavy. He saw footprints, his own, leading away from the house into the woods. But he hadn't left the house. Following them led him deep into the forest. The birds were silent. The trees were still. And then, at the base of a cliff, he saw it. A figure. Square. Human-shaped. But wrong. White eyes stared at him from the mist. Unblinking. Watching. Steve drew his sword. "Who are you?" No reply. Then the figure turned and vanished behind a tree. He chased it, heart pounding. But the forest twisted. The trees rearranged. The world changed. He was back at his house, but everything was slightly off. Crops wilted. Torches flickered with blue flame. And in the corner of his vision, the figure always lingered. Herobrine. Steve tried to sleep that night, but nightmares plagued him. He dreamed of a world torn apart by flame and shadow. Mountains cracked. Villages burned. The sky above was a blood-red void, and in its center, those eyes. Watching. When he awoke, he found blocks missing from his house. Whole walls removed. Items gone. Redstone torches had been placed in unnatural patterns nearby. Circles, spirals, lines pointing north. The animals were gone. He knew it wasn't natural. Not Endermen. Not griefers. This was something else. He scouted the area. Trees with no leaves. Water flowing upward. Chests opening by themselves. A sign had appeared near his portal. Burned into it with fire. Leave. But Steve wasn't the type to run. He spent the next days preparing. Enchanting his gear, reinforcing his base, placing traps. He wrote in his journal every night just to keep his thoughts straight. But each morning a page would be torn out. Herobrine was real. And he was growing stronger. Then one day Steve saw something new. Rising from the hills to the north was a towering, blood-red obelisk. It hadn't been there the day before. He approached it cautiously. The land around it was dead. Grass turned to soul sand. Water was replaced by lava. The sky darkened above and lightning struck at random intervals, even on a clear day. As he reached the base, strange symbols pulsed on the stone. Suddenly he heard it. A voice, deep and echoing from within his mind. You broke the silence. You challenged the cycle. The end was mine. Now the overworld will fall. Steve dropped to his knees, gripping his head. Visions flashed. A ruined nether, corrupted end cities, mobs twisted and fused into horrors. A world dominated by Herobrine. And a sword. Glowing white. Hidden deep beneath the world. The last weapon of the lost builders. The only thing that could stop him. Driven by the vision, Steve began digging. Deeper than any mine he'd built. Past bedrock. Into something below. He found a massive underground structure carved in black stone and quartz. Lava flowed through channels like blood in veins. He found gear, ancient, enchanted, powerful beyond anything he'd seen. And at the heart of the forge, embedded in obsidian, was the sword. Dawnbreaker. Its blade shimmered with both light and shadow. As he touched it, the forge roared to life. Runes ignited. A rush of energy surged through him. The sword spoke, not with words, but through sensation. It would only answer to a soul unbroken. A heart bound to this world. He was chosen. And Herobrine knew. The sky cracked open as he emerged. Thunder raged. Fire fell from the heavens. Portals were opening across the land, dark rifts spilling corrupted mobs. Burning skeletons with void-touched bows, creepers that exploded into poison clouds, flying phantoms with burning white eyes. The final battle had begun. Steve rallied the villages. He brought iron golems to life, armed the blacksmiths, taught farmers how to wield swords. With Dawnbreaker in hand, he led them against wave after wave of Herobrine's corrupted army. The battles were fierce. Forests burned. Castles crumbled. The end and nether had bled into the overworld, warping it. But Steve never fell. He led a strike force to the red obelisk, now a massive fortress in the sky. Wearing enchanted netherite with elytra wings and potions coursing through his veins, he flew through the storm and crashed through its gates. Inside, the final chamber, Herobrine waited. He stood tall, Steve's form but pale, glitching. His eyes glowed pure white. "You shouldn't have come," Herobrine said. His voice echoed in multiple tones, rage, sadness, mockery. Steve drew Dawnbreaker. They charged. The duel shattered the floor. Light clashed with darkness. Swords met in bursts of fire and thunder. Herobrine teleported, summoned minions, rewrote the world beneath Steve's feet, but Steve pressed on. Every strike pushed Herobrine back. Dawnbreaker burned brighter with each swing. "You are nothing," Herobrine screamed. "Just code. Just a player." Steve stood tall. "I'm more than that. I chose to fight." And with a final strike, Dawnbreaker pierced Herobrine's heart. There was silence. Then, light. The fortress crumbled. The sky cleared. Herobrine screamed as he vanished in a burst of code and fading light. The world healed slowly. Portals closed. Forests regrew. The villages sang Steve's name. Statues were built in his honor. Dawnbreaker was placed in a glass vault at the center of a monument. But Steve didn't rest. He built again. Farms, railways, cities. One night he returned to the end, stood on the obsidian island, and in the starlit silence he whispered, "I remember." The book in his pocket whispered once more. Echoes fade. Legends remain.
Minecraft, shadows beneath the bedrock. The rain came down in icy sheets, soaking the coarse earth path leading into the half-forgotten village of Gloamreach. Thunder echoed across the jagged cliffs that surrounded the valley, and lightning cast skeletal silhouettes of birch trees along the muddy road. Steve arrived at dusk, his blue tunic dark with rain and a faint weariness behind his eyes. His compass had broken 3 days earlier, spinning wildly since he crossed the river near Broken Tooth Hill. Ever since, he'd felt, watched. The village was wrong. It had the shape of a typical plains village, wooden homes, fenced crops, a bell in the square. But the houses were empty. Not abandoned, empty, as though the villagers had vanished mid-task. Doors hung open. Torches flickered, barely holding back the dark. The only movement came from the wind nudging shutters and wheat. Steve cautiously entered the square. "Hello," he called. His voice echoed off the buildings. No reply. He reached for his sword as he passed the blacksmith's. The forge was cold, untouched for days. But a single iron sword rested on the anvil, still warm to the touch. That's when he heard it. A low hum beneath his feet. He dropped to one knee, placing a hand to the ground. It was vibrating. Very faintly. Like a pulse. His fingers brushed loose cobblestone. And underneath, bedrock. His eyes narrowed. That's not possible. The vibrations from the ground faded as quickly as they'd come, like a breath held just beneath the soil. Steve stood slowly, eyes scanning the shadows creeping deeper into the village. He entered the blacksmith's house, leaving the door ajar. A torch sputtered weakly in the wall sconce, casting trembling light over the interior. The bed was unmade, with coal dust smudged across the sheets. On the table lay a leather-bound journal, its pages swollen from moisture. Steve picked it up and flipped through it carefully. Day 1. They arrived at night. Not from the forest, not from the caves. From below. I heard it in the walls first. Scratching. Whispering. Then people started disappearing. The priest, then Arlen the farmer. They never screamed. Just, gone. Day 3. I saw one. It wore a villager's face, but the eyes, empty. Hollow. I ran. I ran until I reached the bell tower, and I watched them walk the streets. Not searching. Patrolling. Guarding. They don't want us to leave. Day 5. I dug beneath the forge. I shouldn't have. There's bedrock under the village. Not just deep underground, beneath the surface. And it's cracked. Steve froze. Cracked bedrock? That wasn't possible. Nothing cracked bedrock. Day 6. I heard it call my name from beneath the anvil. Steve's eyes darted to the anvil. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted it. A single block of bedrock sat beneath it, embedded in the cobblestone. But unlike any bedrock Steve had seen, this one pulsed. Faintly. Like a heartbeat. And a fine crack split the surface, leaking smoke. No, darkness. It flowed like ink into the air. Suddenly, something groaned just outside. Steve spun around, drawing his sword. The door creaked open wider. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. And then, knock. 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 Something was at the back door. Steve stepped lightly across the wooden floorboards, sword raised. The knocking came again, 3 sharp, unnatural raps. Then silence. He pressed against the door, listening. Nothing. He threw it open. Empty. No one was there. Only the fields behind the house, swaying in the windless dark. Then he looked down. Footprints. But not ordinary ones, wide and square, like a villager's, but wrong. They were sunken too deep into the mud, the edges glowing faintly with a violet hue. He followed them. They led toward the well at the center of town. As he approached, the torchlight around the square dimmed. Shadows stretched farther than they should have. The bell atop the post swayed though the air was still. Then Steve saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the well. Motionless. He couldn't tell if it was facing him. "Hey," he called. No response. Steve took a cautious step forward. The figure turned its head slowly. No animation. Just a shift, like a statue rotating. Its eyes were white. Not glowing, not lit like an enderman's, but vacant. Hollow. Steve tightened his grip on his sword. The thing cocked its head. Then it opened its mouth. But instead of a voice, a deep grinding sound came out, like stone dragged across stone. The air grew cold. Steve took a step back. The hollow blinked once. And vanished. Not teleported. Vanished, like a glitch erased from reality. The bell began to ring on its own. And the bedrock beneath the anvil pulsed once more. Steve returned to the blacksmith's, this time determined. He tore the floor apart, exposing the strange cracked bedrock block. He placed down a diamond pickaxe. Tried to break it. Nothing. He poured lava over it. Still nothing. But then he remembered the journal, "I dug beneath the forge." He removed the block beside it and found a hidden shaft, narrow and dark, descending straight down into the earth. Against better judgment, he entered. The tunnel was rough-hewn, not made with tools but torn by something with claw-like precision. The further down he went, the colder it became. And then the walls changed. No longer cobblestone. They were blackstone now, darker than obsidian, lined with red veins that pulsed faintly like veins beneath skin. He stepped into a cavern. And what he saw froze the blood in his veins. Pillars of cracked bedrock rose from the earth like teeth. A black altar stood at the center, surrounded by dozens of villager heads, statues. No, mummified. Their mouths were open in silent screams, eyes rotted away. Above the altar floated a cube of void light. A single word etched across it, "Remember." Steve reached toward it. A voice whispered in his head. "Welcome back, Warden's heir." The moment Steve's fingers grazed the floating cube, darkness swallowed the cavern. Total. Consuming. Even his torchlight blinked out. And then, light. Not around him, but in him. Memories that weren't his flared behind his eyes, flashes of ancient cities beneath the deep dark, titanic structures swallowed by time. He saw glowing blue scripts etched in reinforced stone, a ritual chamber beneath an obsidian star, and a colossal figure with glowing chest cavity eyes that beat like a drum, the warden, but not as a monster. As a guardian. And then the betrayal. A cloaked figure performing a ritual, splintering bedrock itself, cracking the world below. Releasing something else. Something not meant to be freed. Steve reeled back, gasping for breath. The cube vanished. And from the void, a voice whispered, "Not human. Not hostile. Almost regretful. You carry his blood. The last of the warden's lineage. Bound to silence. Bound to protect." Steve staggered to the altar. His torch flickered back to life, casting faint light over the statues around him. The villagers. They weren't victims. They were sentinels. Guardians of the seal. And he had just activated it. Stone rumbled. The cracked bedrock in the cavern ceiling above him split wider. A gust of cold wind surged downward. And from the crack, something emerged. Two glowing white eyes. Far above. Watching. Waiting. Steve turned and ran. As Steve sprinted up the black stone shaft, the walls trembled behind him. Dust fell. Faint screeches echoed from the depths below, like thousands of claws dragging against stone. He didn't stop until he burst through the blacksmith's ruined floor, gasping for air. The rain had stopped. The sky was dark. Not from night, but from fog. Thick and black, seeping in through the forest's edge, curling through the village like smoke. Shapes moved within it, tall, broken-bodied creatures with lanterns for eyes. Steve ducked into the shadows, crouching behind a composter. He watched as the watchers passed silently. They didn't walk. They glided. Their heads twisted side to side unnaturally, sniffing the air like wolves. Wherever their gaze landed, crops withered. Stone cracked. Doors warped open. One stopped in front of the well. It turned slowly toward the blacksmith's. Steve didn't breathe. Its head tilted. Then, without a sound, it disappeared into the mist. Steve waited. 10 seconds. 20. Gone. He slipped out the back and bolted toward the library. If this village was hiding warden relics, there might be records. He found the door off its hinges, books scattered. On the lectern lay a map. Drawn in red ink. A labyrinth beneath the village. A central node marked seal, and 3 others marked with strange runes. A note beneath: if one opens, the others follow. Steve traced the line connecting the central seal to the one beneath the chapel. It was already broken. Steve reached the chapel as dawn tried to pierce the fog, failing. Its bell tower was twisted, cracked open like an egg. The stained glass windows were shattered. Something had crawled out from the inside. He crept through the broken pews, sword drawn. The altar had been moved, dragged across the floor, leaving a trail of deep claw marks and dried red dust. He pushed it aside. Another shaft beneath. He lit a torch and descended. This tunnel was wider, lined with decayed stone bricks, chiseled with cryptic symbols that pulsed in red whenever his torch got near. The air stank of sulfur and rot. At the bottom, another cavern. Smaller than the first, but filled with cages made of warped iron. And bones. Too many bones. He stepped carefully, then saw it, another void cube. But this one was fractured, its light flickering like a dying flame. Beside it stood something once human. Its back to him. Robed. Bent. Breathing slowly. Steve froze. The thing turned. It wore a villager's robe, but its face was stretched, skin like leather, eyes blank and black. Its jaw unhinged as it whispered, "You broke the second seal." It lunged. Steve blocked its claws with his sword. They scraped along the blade, sending sparks flying. He countered, slashing across its chest. It let out a bone-shaking shriek and vanished into the wall, phasing through the stone like smoke. Steve didn't wait. He smashed the fractured cube with his sword. It shattered. The walls screamed. He ran. The cavern trembled violently as the fractured cube exploded into shards of dark energy. The ground shook, and the air thickened with a suffocating chill. Steve sprinted up the tunnel, his breath ragged, heart pounding like a hammer. As he reached the chapel floor, the fog outside had thickened to near impenetrable darkness. The village lay silent, but Steve felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from every shadow. From the depths below, a sound echoed, a low, guttural growl mixed with a chorus of whispers. The bedrock crack beneath the forge had widened, a black maw opening into the earth. Steve knew one truth: whatever had been sealed was stirring, hungry for release. He lit a torch and prepared to return to the blacksmith's basement. He would need answers, and allies. The night was just beginning. Steve made his way to the village outskirts where the ancient forest began. Moonlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy, casting eerie patterns on the forest floor. There, he found an old figure, a villager clad in weathered armor, carrying a torch etched with glowing runes. "Who are you?" Steve called, lowering his sword cautiously. The villager turned. His eyes glowed with a soft blue light. "I am Elric," he said, voice trembling yet firm. "Last of the wardens. Guardian of the seals." Steve nodded slowly. "I'm the warden's heir. The seal beneath the forge. I activated it." Elric's face darkened. "Then the darkness has heard the call." Together, they spoke in whispered tones, piecing together the legend of a creature trapped beneath the village, an ancient evil whose power could unravel the fabric of their world. The only hope, to find the 3 remaining seals and reinforce them, or face the total corruption of the overworld. With dawn breaking the suffocating night, Steve and Elric prepared for a dangerous journey beneath the village. Armed with enchanted swords, torches, and ancient wards, they descended into the labyrinth marked on the map. The tunnels were filled with traps, pressure plates that summoned swarms of hostile creatures, walls that closed in suddenly, and whispers that tried to unravel their minds. The air grew colder, heavier. At the first junction, a shadow flickered. Eyes, too many eyes, watched from the dark. Steve steadied his grip. The battle for Glomreach's soul had begun. Steve and Elric stepped cautiously into the cavernous chamber marked on the map. The walls were lined with ancient runes, glowing faintly in sickly green. The air was thick with a putrid stench, and faint whispers echoed from every corner. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A massive maw tore open in the cavern floor, revealing a pit of writhing shadows. From the depths emerged twisted forms, monstrous, grotesque creatures with limbs that bent impossibly and eyes that shone with malice. "Get ready!" Elric shouted. Blades clashed with shadow. Steve swung with precision, cutting through the darkness, but the creatures multiplied like a spreading plague. The cavern was alive, hungry for them. Steve's sword glowed bright, the power of Dawnbreaker within him pulsing. With a roar, he charged the maw, determined to seal the darkness once and for all. Beyond the maw lay the final seal, an ancient pedestal covered in inscriptions, holding a glowing crystal suspended above it. Steve placed his hands on the pedestal. The runes flared, and the crystal's light intensified. But a chilling voice echoed through the chamber. "You cannot undo what has begun." Herobrine's visage flickered in the shadows, eyes blazing. The final confrontation was at hand. Steve tightened his grip on his sword, ready to face the darkness and save the world or fall trying. Herobrine stepped forward, his form shifting like smoke, eyes burning with cold fury. "You think you can undo what I have set in motion? This world belongs to the shadows now." Steve tightened his grip on Dawnbreaker, its blade humming with light. "Not while I still stand." The chamber shook as Herobrine summoned twisted mobs, fiery skeletons, shadow creepers, and corrupted zombies, all snarling and charging. Steve and Elric fought back to back, their blades slicing through the darkness. Every strike from Dawnbreaker sent waves of light, pushing back the corruption. Herobrine laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the cavern. This is only the beginning. As the battle raged, Steve realized the seals were weakening, not because of Herobrine alone, but due to a cycle of corruption and guardianship dating back centuries. He shouted to Elric, "We must break the cycle. We can't just fight the darkness, we have to end it." Together, they combined their strength, activating the pedestal's crystal. A brilliant beam of light shot upward, illuminating the cavern and banishing the shadows. Herobrine screamed, fading into nothingness. The seals glowed brightly, reforged. Peace, for now, had returned. With the shadows banished and the seals reforged, the village of Gloamreach began to stir back to life. The fog lifted, and sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden light on the once withered crops. Villagers slowly returned, their faces pale but filled with hope. Elric guided them in rebuilding, teaching old protective rites and the true history of the wardens who kept balance between light and dark. Steve stood at the village edge, staring toward the horizon. Though the immediate threat was gone, he knew the world was vast and filled with other unknown dangers. The story of the shadows beneath the bedrock was only one chapter. And somewhere, deep in the void, other echoes stirred. Steve placed Dawnbreaker on a stone pedestal in the village square. The sword glowed faintly, a reminder of the price paid to keep the darkness sealed. Elric approached, nodding solemnly. "You have more than survived, Steve. You have become a guardian of this world." Steve smiled faintly, the weight of his journey heavy but his resolve stronger. "The world needs watchers," he said. "And I'll be ready." As the sun set over Gloamreach, the stars shimmered brightly. Somewhere in the night sky, a new constellation formed, an ancient symbol of hope and vigilance. Weeks passed, and life returned to Gloamreach, but Steve could not shake the feeling that something still lingered beyond the village borders. One evening, as the wind whispered through the birch trees, Steve heard faint voices, soft, echoing words in a language long forgotten. He followed the sound into the forest, where the shadows seemed to twist and reach. Near a moss-covered stone circle, the air shimmered with an unnatural chill. Suddenly, ghostly figures emerged, ancient wardens long past, their eyes glowing with a spectral light. They spoke in unison, "The cycle is not over. The darkness waits." Steve realized his fight was far from done. Armed with newfound knowledge and Dawnbreaker's light, Steve prepared to journey beneath the world's surface, into the deep dark itself. There, ancient powers slept, and shadows whispered secrets that could either save or doom the overworld. The adventure was just beginning. Steve stood at the mouth of the newly uncovered shaft just beyond Gloamreach's edge. The air here was heavy, cold, and thick with the scent of earth and ancient stone. He adjusted his armor, checked his inventory, torches, food, potions of night vision and strength, and, of course, Dawnbreaker strapped at his side. The cavern's mouth yawned wide, swallowing the faint light of the surface. Taking a deep breath, Steve stepped inside. The walls were slick with moisture, and the faint echo of dripping water surrounded him. As he descended deeper, the light from above faded until all that remained was the glow of his torch, flickering shadows dancing against rough obsidian walls. He knew the deep dark was more than just a biome. It was a prison, a tomb for ancient secrets and horrors that had long been buried. The deeper Steve traveled, the more the whispers grew, voices like wind through dead leaves, barely audible but unmistakably there. In the flickering light, he noticed strange glyphs etched into the stone, remnants of an ancient civilization, long lost beneath the earth. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast underground cathedral, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. Massive stone pillars pulsed faintly with blue light. At the center stood a pedestal, cracked and worn. Steve approached cautiously, heart pounding. On the pedestal rested a crystal orb, swirling with shifting shadows and light. He reached out to touch it, and the cavern filled with a blinding glow. As Steve's fingers brushed the crystal orb, a surge of energy coursed through him, blurring his vision. The cavern dissolved, replaced by swirling images. He saw the ancient wardens, colossal beings clad in glowing armor, battling a creeping darkness that spread like a virus through the land. He saw the forging of Dawnbreaker, the sealing of the shadows beneath the bedrock, and a prophecy etched in stone: when the last warden's heir awakens, the shadows shall rise anew. Only through light and courage shall the balance be restored. The vision faded, and Steve was left alone in the silent cathedral, the orb now dark and lifeless in his hands. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. Cracks appeared in the obsidian floor, and from the fissures emerged shadowy tendrils reaching hungrily toward Steve. He drew Dawnbreaker, its blade glowing fiercely, and swung through the encroaching darkness. The cavern filled with echoes of screams and whispers. Steve realized the shadows were awakening, stirred by his presence. He needed to find the source and stop it before the deep dark consumed everything. Steve plunged deeper into the cavern, following the trail of pulsing shadows that slithered across the walls. The air grew colder, thick with an oppressive silence broken only by the distant drip of water. Ahead, a massive chamber opened up, illuminated by an eerie violet glow emanating from a colossal black crystal embedded in the floor, the heart of darkness. Veins of dark energy pulsed outward, corrupting the stone around it. As Steve stepped closer, the crystal shuddered and cracked. From within, a deep voice rumbled, "You cannot stop the inevitable, Warden's heir." Shadows coalesced into a towering figure, an ancient corrupted warden, its eyes burning white-hot with rage. Steve gripped Dawnbreaker tight. The final battle was here. The corrupted warden lunged, its massive claws tearing through the air. Steve dodged, striking with Dawnbreaker, each blow sending bursts of light into the darkness. The cavern shook as their battle tore through the ancient hall. Summoning every ounce of strength and will, Steve struck the heart of darkness with the blade. A blinding explosion of light and shadow erupted. When the dust settled, the cavern was silent. The heart shattered, the corrupted warden reduced to dust. The shadows receded. Balance was restored. Steve emerged from the depths of the deep dark, his armor scuffed and his breath heavy but his spirit unbroken. The first rays of dawn spilled over the village, bathing Gloamreach in golden light. Birds sang once more, and the long silent fields began to stir with life. Villagers gathered around, their faces filled with awe and gratitude. Elric approached, placing a hand on Steve's shoulder. "You've done what no one thought possible. The darkness is truly gone." Steve looked toward the horizon, feeling the weight of his journey but also the hope of new beginnings. The world was vast, and adventure still called. But for now, peace reigned over Gloamreach. At the heart of the village, Steve placed Dawnbreaker upon a carved stone altar, its light a beacon against the night. He stood watch, knowing that while this battle had ended, the story of the wardens and shadows was far from over. For as long as darkness existed, so would the need for guardians. And Steve would be ready. Just as the village settled into calm, a sudden chill swept through Gloamreach. From the treetops, a raven's caw pierced the morning air. Steve looked up, narrowing his eyes. A scroll, tied with a faded red ribbon, dropped from the branches onto his outstretched hand. He unfurled it cautiously. The words were written in a hurried script: "The shadows are never truly gone. They wait, watching from the edges. Beware the forgotten portals beneath the old watchtower." Steve's heart quickened. The fight was not over. Nightfall found Steve standing before the crumbling watchtower on Gloamreach's northern border. Vines strangled the stone walls, and the wooden door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Torches flickered in his hand as he stepped inside. Stairs spiraled downward into blackness. Each step echoed in the silence. At the bottom, a faint glow pulsed. Steve stepped into a cavern lit by eerie blue flames. A portal shimmered, unstable and crackling with chaotic energy. The whispers returned. The shadows stirred again. Steve stepped closer to the shimmering portal, its surface rippling like dark water. Strange glyphs hovered in the air around it, glowing with an unstable energy that made his skin prickle. He reached out, feeling a cold that seeped into his bones. Suddenly, the portal pulsed violently, and ghostly faces flickered within its depths, faces twisted in silent screams. From the shadows behind him, a soft voice whispered, "The breach has begun." Steve spun around to see Elric, eyes wide with fear. "We must close it," Elric urged. "Or the shadows will flood the world once more." With no time to hesitate, Steve prepared for the fight ahead, knowing the fate of Gloamreach, and possibly the entire Overworld, hung in the balance. Taking a deep breath, Steve stepped through the portal. The world around him shattered into shards of darkness and light. He fell through a void of swirling shadows, landing hard on cold stone. The air was thick with decay and despair. Ahead, towering obsidian spires stretched into a blood-red sky. This was a realm beyond the Overworld, the Shadow Rift. And Steve was not alone. Steve stood amidst the jagged obsidian spires, their sharp edges cutting into the crimson sky. The air tasted like ash and sorrow. Every breath was heavy with despair. Ahead, twisted creatures slithered, shadows with glowing eyes and sharp claws. A faint light flickered on the horizon. Steve gripped Dawnbreaker tighter. "This place, it feeds on fear," he murmured. Suddenly, a voice echoed, a distorted whisper in the dark. "Warden's heir, you cannot escape the shadows." As Steve ventured deeper into the rift, the landscape shifted, forests of dead trees, rivers of black liquid, ruins of ancient civilizations. He encountered survivors, lost explorers trapped in the shadows, their eyes hollow, minds frayed. Together, they plotted to find the rift's heart and close the breach. But the shadows had eyes everywhere. A storm of darkness gathered. The final war was about to begin. Steve and the ragged band of survivors pushed forward, their path blocked by an advancing horde of shadow beasts. The creatures' howls pierced the air as they swarmed like a living darkness. "Hold the line!" Steve shouted, raising Dawnbreaker. Its blade shone like a beacon against the encroaching gloom. Elric and the others fought fiercely beside him, but the shadows kept coming, endless, relentless. Suddenly, the ground cracked, and from the fissure emerged a colossal figure, an ancient shadow guardian, towering and terrible, eyes burning with malice. Steve's heart pounded. The final battle for the rift's fate had begun. With a roar, Steve charged the shadow guardian. Dawnbreaker blazed with radiant light, clashing against the beast's dark armor. Each strike sent ripples through the rift's fabric, shaking the very shadows themselves. Elric and the survivors used torches and enchanted weapons to hold off the lesser creatures, giving Steve the chance to land a decisive blow. As the guardian fell, the rift began to collapse, its dark energy dissipating like smoke. Steve and his companions rushed toward the fading portal back to their world. The fight was over. For now. Steve stumbled through the collapsing portal, coughing as he emerged back in Gloamreach's forest. The morning sun shone brighter than it had in months, warming his chilled skin. Elric caught his arm. "You did it, Steve. The rift is sealed." Steve nodded, exhaustion washing over him. "But the shadows will always try to come back." "We'll be ready," Elric said, eyes determined. Together, they walked back to the village, where life was beginning anew. At the village square, villagers gathered around Dawnbreaker's altar. Steve raised his sword, its light reflecting hope and vigilance. "The shadows never truly disappear," he said. "But as long as we stand together, they will never win." The crowd cheered, their voices echoing through the valley. Above, the sky was clear, the stars shining like ancient sentinels watching over the world.
Despite the village's newfound peace, Steve could feel lingering ripples of shadow magic beneath the earth. One night, as he walked near the ancient stone circle, a faint glow caught his eye. Approaching, he uncovered a hidden hatch, covered in cryptic runes. With a deep breath, He opened it and descended into darkness. Below, vast tunnels stretched endlessly, walls etched with murals depicting battles between wardens and shadow beings, secrets lost to time. Steve knew his journey was far from over. At the end of the tunnels, Steve discovered an underground archive, a repository of knowledge left by the original wardens. Dusty tomes and glowing scrolls revealed forgotten lore, powerful enchantments, and warnings of shadows that could corrupt entire worlds. As Steve studied the ancient texts, a chill ran down his spine, a prophecy hinting at a greater darkness awakening beyond the stars. Steve traced his finger along the faded script of the prophecy. When shadows fall from the stars, the balance will shatter. The warden's heir must rise, wield Dawnbreaker's light to shield the realms, or all will be lost to endless night. Outside, the ground trembled slightly. An omen? Suddenly, a soft glow appeared from the archive's entrance. Steve turned to see Elric, holding a strange crystal pulsing with celestial energy. "We need to prepare," Elric said gravely. "The stars themselves are warning us." Steve and Elric set out to find other descendants of the wardens, hidden protectors scattered across distant lands. Their journey took them through dense jungles, scorching deserts, and frozen tundras, where ancient temples guarded secrets and powerful allies awaited. Each guardian bore unique powers tied to the elements, united by the sacred duty to protect the Overworld. Together they would face the coming storm. As Steve and the newly united guardians returned to Gloamreach, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Lightning cracked the sky, and the air grew thick with tension. Whispers of shadow creatures spreading beyond the village reached their ears, entire forests succumbing to creeping darkness. The guardians prepared their defenses, forging weapons and setting ancient wards. Steve stood at the forefront, Dawnbreaker gleaming in his hands. "The shadows will come," he said, "but together we will stand." The night erupted in chaos as waves of shadow beasts poured into the village. Blades clashed, spells soared, and the ground shook beneath the fury of battle. Steve and the guardians fought valiantly, their combined strength pushing back the darkness. In the heart of the fight, Steve faced a monstrous shadow dragon, its scales black as void and eyes burning with hatred. With a roar, he charged, channeling all his power into Dawnbreaker. Steve's sword blazed with pure light as he battled the shadow dragon. Each strike weakened the beast, but its rage grew fiercer. The village trembled beneath their fight, and the skies darkened ominously. Elric and the other guardians fought alongside Steve, holding off the shadow hordes. Together, their power formed a radiant shield around Gloamreach. The dragon let out a deafening roar, summoning a swirling vortex of darkness aimed at Steve. Summoning all his courage, Steve plunged Dawnbreaker into the vortex. Light exploded outward, engulfing the dragon and scattering the shadows. Silence fell. As dawn broke, the shadows retreated. The village was battered but standing. Steve looked to the horizon, feeling the weight of the battles behind him and hope for the days ahead. The guardians pledged to watch over the world, guarding against any shadow that might return. Steve raised Dawnbreaker one last time. For the light. For the world. The sun rose over Gloamreach, its warm light bathing the village in golden hues. The once shadowed fields now flourished with vibrant crops, and the villagers moved with smiles, their fears eased. Steve stood atop a hill overlooking the valley, Dawnbreaker sheathed at his side. Around him, the guardians, his friends and allies, prepared to journey back to their lands, their mission complete but ever vigilant. Elric approached, placing a hand on Steve's shoulder. "The darkness may never fully leave," Elric said quietly, "but as long as there are wardens, there will be hope." Steve nodded, a calm certainty settling over him. "Then we'll stand watch. Together." The winds whispered through the trees, carrying with them a promise that light would always find a way, even in the deepest shadows. And so, the legend of the warden's heir passed into history, an eternal guardian in a world forever balanced between light and dark.